The rain came down in sheets, the kind that turned streets into rivers and left people huddling under whatever shelter they could find. Roy had just finished his shift at the auto shop and was on his way home when he saw her, standing at the side of the road, soaked to the bone, her umbrella little more than a useless barrier against the downpour. The light from his truck's headlights caught her just as he was passing by, and without even thinking, he hit the brakes and pulled over. He hadn't meant to stop, he hadn't planned to, but the sight of someone stranded, looking so vulnerable in the storm, had tugged at something deep inside him. Roy wasn't the kind of guy to leave someone hanging, especially not a woman in the rain. He rolled down his window, squinting against the storm, and called out. "You need a ride?" he shouted over the roar of the rain. The woman looked up, startled at first. Then she smiled faintly, her eyes a mix of relief and embarrassment. She glanced at the road behind her, clearly conflicted. He could see her weighing the decision. She was clearly cold, drenched through, and even from here, he could see her shivering. I'm really sorry to bother you," she called back. "But my car broke down a few miles back. I just don't know what to do." Roy's heart went out to her. There was something in her voice, a quiet desperation that tugged at him. She wasn't asking for help outright, but it was clear she needed it. And he was in the perfect position to offer it. It would have been easy to keep driving, to ignore her and go on with his day. But Roy wasn't that kind of person. He knew what it felt like to be stuck, to feel like the world was too big to face alone. Helping someone else, even in this small way, felt right. "No need to apologize," Roy said, giving a reassuring smile. "Get in. I'll give you a ride wherever you need to go." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face. He could see the caution in her, the uncertainty of accepting help from a stranger. Roy didn't blame her. There were plenty of people in the world who wouldn't have stopped, and even more who would have expected something in return. He wasn't one of those people. He just wanted to help. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. Roy nodded. "Positive. No one should be stuck out here in this weather. Come on, hop in." After a brief moment, she made her decision, and with a sigh of relief, she opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat. Roy could tell she was grateful, though she tried to hide it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to clear some of the rainwater from her eyes. Roy glanced at her as she settled into the seat, her clothes soaked through, her hair matted against her forehead. She looked tired, frazzled. It wasn't the kind of thing he expected to see when he pulled over for a ride. But then again, he hadn't expected much of anything today. "I'm Roy," he said, offering a handshake. She looked at him for a moment before taking his hand. "Aaron," she said softly. "Aaron," he repeated, nodding as he pulled back onto the road. "Where do you need to go?" "Just up the street," Aaron said. "Not too far. I'll be okay after that. I just couldn't get a hold of anyone and I was getting soaked standing there." Roy nodded, glancing at her as he drove. She was still shivering, and despite herself, she had pulled her coat tighter around her. Roy turned the heat up a little more, hoping to offer her some comfort. The quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic wipers were the only sounds between them for a few minutes, both of them lost in their own thoughts. He didn't mind the silence. Sometimes, it was nice to not have to say anything, to just be there with another person, offering help without expecting anything in return. "So, what happened to your car?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "Oh, it's just an old junker," she said with a small laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's been on its last legs for a while. I knew it was going to give out eventually." Roy nodded, understanding. He'd worked on plenty of old cars at the shop. His whole life had been about fixing things that were worn down and broken. It was always a challenge, but that was part of the fun. Getting something to work again was always satisfying. They talked a bit more as they drove, Roy asking about her life and what brought her to the area. Erin was hesitant at first, her answers brief, but soon enough she seemed to relax. She talked about her job, her family, and her hopes for the future. Roy listened more than he spoke, content to hear her stories, to know that she was finding some comfort in the ride. He could tell there was something more behind her words, something she was holding back, but she didn't push it. She didn't seem like someone who wanted to unload on a stranger. As they reached the area where Erin's apartment was located, she looked at him and smiled. "I'm really grateful," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just standing there thinking I was going to be stuck in the rain all night." Roy gave her a friendly smile. "No problem. Just glad I could help. You take care now." Erin opened the door, stepping out into the rain once more, but this time with a sense of relief. She turned back to Roy for a moment, her expression soft. "I'll make it up to you," she said, her voice sincere. "I promise." Roy shook his head. You don't have to do that. It was nothing. Just a ride. She smiled again, but this time it seemed more genuine, more at peace. Still, thank you. You're the kind of person the world needs more of. Roy waved as she walked away, heading toward the entrance of her building. He watched her disappear into the lobby before he turned his attention back to the road. It had been a small act of kindness, but it had made a difference. Roy didn't expect anything in return. He didn't need anything. Helping someone out, even in the smallest way, was enough for him. He felt good about what he had done, and that was enough to put a smile on his face as he drove home. The next day, as Roy sat down with his coffee, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, expecting it to be a work-related message. But when he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was from Aaron. He picked it up quickly, reading the message that flashed across the screen. Roy, thank you again for yesterday. I can't stop thinking about your kindness. I've arranged something for you. Check your driveway in the morning. Aaron. Roy stared at the message, trying to process what it meant. Arrange something? For him? What could it be? The next morning, Roy opened the front door, his heart thumping with a mix of curiosity and confusion. He glanced around the driveway, expecting to see nothing more than the usual. But instead, his eyes widened in shock. A helicopter was hovering just above his yard. His mind went blank for a moment, the surrealism of the situation hitting him all at once. A helicopter? What was going on? What was Aaron doing? Before he could even think of what to do next, the helicopter slowly descended, landing softly in his yard. As the blades slowed and the noise quieted, Roy stood frozen, unable to move. What was going on? Had he imagined the whole thing? The door to the helicopter opened, and out stepped Aaron, dressed in a sleek, tailored outfit that looked even more out of place in Roy's modest neighborhood than the helicopter itself. Roy blinked, unable to process what was happening. Aaron? He called out, his voice a mix of confusion and awe. What is this? She smiled warmly, her eyes glinting with something playful yet serious. Roy, I've been thinking about what you did for me yesterday. You didn't just help a stranger, you reminded me that kindness still exists in the world. I wanted to return the favor. Roy stood, speechless as she approached him, the helicopter's engine still humming softly in the background. Return the favor? He asked, still trying to comprehend the situation. Aaron's smile grew wider as she nodded. This is just the beginning, Roy. I want to show you how much your kindness means. The world around him seemed to shift, and for the first time in a long time, Roy felt like he was standing on the edge of something much bigger than himself. Roy stared at the helicopter for what felt like an eternity. His feet remained rooted to the ground, his heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and wonder. He had always considered himself an ordinary guy, a mechanic, a simple man with a straightforward life. Yet here he was, standing in his front yard, watching a sleek helicopter touch down like something out of a movie. As the helicopter's blades slowed to a halt, Aaron stepped out with the grace of someone who belonged to a world that felt so distant from Roy's own. She wore an impeccably tailored suit, her hair styled perfectly despite the weather, her eyes shining with a mix of warmth and confidence. The whole scene was surreal, like something he had imagined. The ground beneath him felt unsteady, as though the very earth had shifted, and Roy was struggling to stay anchored. Aaron? Roy called out, his voice hoarse, his mind still trying to process the situation. She smiled as she walked toward him, her footsteps confident yet relaxed. There was something serene about her presence, like she had everything under control, and yet, there was an undeniable warmth in the way she looked at him. I know this might seem a little over the top, Roy, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But I wanted to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. What you did for me, it meant more than you know. Roy opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His mind was racing, trying to catch up with the flood of questions, confusion, and surprise that filled him. He had helped a woman stranded in the rain, a simple act of kindness, but now, standing before him, was a woman who seemed to have more power, more resources, than he had ever imagined. A helicopter? This wasn't just a thank you. This was something entirely different. Thank you? Roy finally managed to say, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. This is all too much. I was just doing what anyone would have done. Aaron chuckled softly, the sound light but full of sincerity. I know you were. But not everyone would have done it. Not everyone takes the time to help a stranger in need. Most people would have driven past me without a second thought. But you didn't. She stepped closer, her eyes locking with his, and for a moment Roy felt as though he was the only person in the world. There was something magnetic about her, something that drew him in, even though he was so out of place in this world she inhabited. It was as if she had a way of making him feel important, seen, even though he had never been part of the circles she moved in. Roy shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Aaron, I don't know what to say. This is overwhelming. I'm just a mechanic. I fix cars for a living. I didn't expect this, at all. Aaron smiled softly, her expression kind, understanding. Roy, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to explain yourself. What you did for me was simple, yes. But it was also extraordinary. And sometimes, extraordinary acts of kindness deserve something more than a thank you. Roy didn't know how to respond. He had always lived a modest life, quiet, grounded, and without much fanfare. His world was filled with the hum of engines, the smell of grease, and the comfort of knowing what to expect each day. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't expect anything. But Aaron was making him rethink everything. Aaron seemed to sense his discomfort. She stepped back slightly, giving him a little space, but her smile remained warm. I know this isn't what you expected, Roy. But I've been thinking about this since yesterday. I believe there's more to what happened than just me getting a ride in the rain. What you did is the kind of thing that people don't often do anymore. Roy took a step back, trying to process her words. What do you mean? You helped me out by letting me give you a ride. That's all it was. I wasn't expecting anything in return. I just couldn't leave you standing out there. Exactly, Aaron said, her eyes sparkling as she spoke. That's what makes it special. You didn't expect anything. You didn't even hesitate. You just saw someone in need and helped. That's rare. And I want to show you that kindness like that doesn't go unnoticed. She gestured to the helicopter. This is just the beginning, Roy. I want to offer you something. An opportunity. Something that could change your life. Roy's mind spun with her words. An opportunity? Change his life? He wasn't sure what she meant, but his heart began to race, both with excitement and unease. He wasn't a man who sought fame or fortune. He didn't need anything to change. But here was Aaron, offering him something beyond anything he had ever imagined. I don't understand, Roy said, his voice a little shaky. I've never even met you before yesterday. Why are you doing all this for me? Aaron took a deep breath, her expression serious. Because Roy, people like you are rare. People who give without expecting anything in return. You reminded me that the world can still be good. That there are people who are willing to help others, no matter how small the act. I don't know if you realize this, but that kind of thing is worth recognizing. Roy swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever this was. He wasn't used to people like Aaron, people who lived in a world of privilege and wealth. His life had always been simple, lived with his hands in the grease and the hum of machines. But now, standing in front of this woman, he felt a pull, an overwhelming desire to know what this opportunity was, even if he wasn't sure he could accept it. I still don't know what you're offering, Roy said quietly. I'm just a mechanic, Aaron. I fix cars, I work long hours. That's my life. I don't know what I'd do with something bigger than that. Aaron's eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him. That's exactly why I'm offering this to you. You don't see it yet, Roy, but you're capable of more than you think. Your humility, your kindness, it's what makes you special. You don't need to change who you are. You just need to see what's out there. There's a world beyond the auto shop, beyond the everyday grind. And I want to show you that world. I want to help you discover what's possible when you step outside the box you've built for yourself. Roy felt the weight of her words, her gaze steady and full of meaning. She wasn't asking him to become someone he wasn't. She was offering him a chance to step into a different world, a world he'd never thought he'd be a part of. He didn't know if he was ready for that, but something deep inside him stirred with curiosity. I don't know what to say, Roy admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Aaron replied. Just think about it. Let me show you what could be possible. It's not just about the helicopter or the lunch or any of the things you're imagining. It's about giving you a chance to see what your life could be beyond what you've always known. You've done something incredible, and now I want to give you the opportunity to do something more with it. Roy's heart raced as he stood there, torn between his simple life and the unknown future that Aaron was offering him. He didn't know where this would lead. He didn't know if he was ready to take that leap. But for the first time, the possibility of something more, something bigger than himself, felt just within reach. Aaron smiled again, her expression hopeful. Take your time, Roy. There's no rush. But know this, you deserve more than what you've settled for. And I want to help you see that. Roy took a deep breath, looking from her to the helicopter and back to the quiet street that had always been his world. His life, simple and predictable, was about to change. And he wasn't sure if he was ready, but somehow he knew it was something he couldn't walk away from. I'll think about it, he said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'll think about it. And for the first time in a long time, Roy felt like he was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. The days following that surreal encounter were filled with a quiet uncertainty. Roy couldn't stop thinking about Erin or the unexpected whirlwind she had introduced into his life. The night after the helicopter landed, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the buzz of questions that kept racing through his mind. He had been a mechanic all his life. He had never craved wealth or status. He was content with the simplicity of his routine, with the stability of his job and the small, comfortable life he had built for himself. But now, Erin had dropped something into his lap that threatened to upset that delicate balance. The day after Erin left him with a vague promise of an opportunity, Roy couldn't shake the sense of something significant hanging in the air. Her words had stayed with him. You deserve more than you've settled for. It was a phrase that echoed through his mind constantly, and he found himself wondering if perhaps he had been living too small for too long. Was this what people like Erin saw? Potential waiting to be realized? Or was he simply a pawn in some grand gesture of charity that he couldn't yet understand? By midweek, Roy still hadn't made a decision. He went to work at the auto shop as usual, but something was different. His mind wasn't fully there. He found himself distracted, looking out the window every so often, wondering if the helicopter would return. Wondering if there was more to this than just an invitation to lunch. Erin's world was so far removed from his own that the idea of joining it, of stepping out of his comfort zone, felt like stepping into someone else's shoes, ones that didn't quite fit. He decided to call her. Roy didn't know why, but something inside him needed to get clarity. The confusion was weighing on him, and it wasn't until he heard her voice that he realized how much he needed it. "Hello, Roy," Erin answered, her voice warm and welcoming, just as it had been when they first met. "How are you?" "I'm okay," Roy said, his voice coming out quieter than he had intended. "Listen, Erin, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About the opportunity you mentioned." There was a pause on the other end of the line. He imagined her sitting somewhere with a thoughtful expression, her eyes narrowing in consideration. After a moment, she spoke again. "Roy, you don't need to rush. I don't want you to feel pressured. This is about giving you a choice, not pushing you into something you're not ready for." Roy rubbed the back of his neck, taking a deep breath. "I know, but it's hard to ignore. I don't know what to make of it. My life, it's simple. I fix cars. I come home. I don't need much. But you," he stopped himself, unsure how to articulate the confusion that had settled deep in his chest. "You're offering me something bigger. And I don't know if I'm ready for it." "I understand," Erin said, her tone softer now. "But that's exactly why I'm offering it. Because you're ready for more, Roy. I see something in you, something you might not even see in yourself yet." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a long moment Roy couldn't bring himself to respond. He wasn't sure if it was fear or uncertainty or the simple fact that his whole life had revolved around staying under the radar, doing his job and not rocking the boat. Now it felt like someone had opened a door to a world he wasn't sure he belonged to. "You're not just offering me a job, are you?" Roy finally said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This is more than that." Erin chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to ground him even through the phone. "No, Roy. It's not just a job. It's an opportunity for you to see what else is out there. You've spent your life fixing things, solving problems. But what about you? What if you could fix something bigger than just a car? What if you could help people, reach people in ways you've never imagined? You have that potential." Roy leaned back in his chair, staring out the shop window. He had spent years fixing cars, making sure they ran right, taking pride in his work because it was something he understood. People came to him because they trusted him to get things working again, to fix what was broken. But this? Erin's words felt like a whole new language, something he wasn't sure he could translate. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," Roy said, shaking his head. "I'm just a mechanic." "Exactly," Erin replied, her voice firm. "You're exactly the kind of person who can make a difference. You understand how things work, how people work. It's not about fitting into a mold. It's about breaking the mold." Roy sat in silence, his mind working through everything she had said. The idea of leaving everything behind, of stepping into a completely new life, was terrifying. But there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the pull. He had spent so much time in his small world, doing what he knew, that the thought of something more felt like a challenge, one he wasn't sure he could turn down. "I need time," Roy finally said. "I can't make a decision like this on the fly. I need to think it over." "I understand," Erin said gently. "Take all the time you need, Roy. I'm here when you're ready." Roy hung up the phone, his heart heavy but his mind a little clearer. He had never been one for taking risks, but this felt like a risk worth taking. Erin saw something in him, something he wasn't sure he had ever seen in himself. She was offering him a chance to do more, to be more. And for the first time in a long time, Roy wondered if it was possible to step outside the life he had built and walk toward something greater. Later that day, as the sun began to set and the shop grew quieter, Roy found himself thinking about all the possibilities. What would it look like to leave his routine behind? What would it look like to embrace an opportunity that could change everything? That evening, as Roy stood in his small kitchen, staring out the window at the quiet street, he made a decision. He didn't know exactly what he was stepping into, but the chance was too big to ignore. He needed to see where it would take him. The next morning, as Roy sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Erin. "Roy, I hope you've had time to think about it. Whenever you're ready, I'm here." Roy stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the phone. This was it. This was the moment when his life could change, when the quiet routine he had lived by for so long could be left behind for something unknown, something bigger. He typed back the words he had been thinking all night, "I'm ready." With that one simple message, Roy knew that everything was about to change. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, he was ready to step into a future full of possibility. The next few days were a blur. Roy had made the decision to step into the unknown, and now, it felt as if the world was moving faster than he could keep up with. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Erin's team, coordinating logistics for the next phase. It was hard for Roy to reconcile the ordinary, grounded man he had always been with the whirlwind that was beginning to sweep him into a new life. He had gone from working on cars in a modest auto shop to preparing for an opportunity that felt like something out of a dream. On the third day after his decision, a black car pulled up in front of his house just as he was finishing his coffee. He stood by the window, his heart racing with the same excitement and nervousness he'd felt when he had first received the call from Erin. The car had arrived, the driver dressed impeccably in a suit, waiting for him. This wasn't his life, Roy thought. This wasn't the world he knew. He glanced at the door of the shop across the street. The worn-down shop, the same one he had worked in for years, seemed to fade into the distance, as if it had never quite belonged to him. Or maybe he had never belonged to it. Whatever it was, Roy didn't feel the same attachment anymore. The choice had been made. He had told Erin he was ready. Now it was time to see where that path would take him. With a deep breath, Roy grabbed his coat and headed out the door. The car's sleek exterior glistened in the morning sun, but it felt alien to him. His boots clicked on the pavement as he walked toward the driver, who opened the door with a practiced motion. He felt out of place, the weight of the decision pressing on him. "Roy Carter?" the driver asked with a professional smile. "That's me," Roy said, trying to hide his unease. "Where are we headed?" "Miss Taylor is expecting you," the driver replied smoothly. "She has prepared a few things for you. You'll get the details along the way." Roy climbed into the back of the car, the plush leather seats feeling too comfortable for someone who had spent years working in grease-stained overalls. The car pulled away smoothly, and as it merged into the quiet morning traffic, Roy watched the world outside change. The buildings grew taller, the streets became more crowded, and soon they were on the highway, speeding toward the unknown. The driver didn't speak much, leaving Roy with his thoughts. He didn't know what to expect when he arrived at his destination. But the more he thought about it, the more Roy realized that he had never truly thought about his life as a journey before. He had always seen it as a series of small steps, working hard each day, keeping his head down, doing the job. But now, as the car sped through the city, everything felt different. Like the first page of a book, the story of his life had just begun to shift. The car finally pulled up in front of a large building, an office tower so tall that Roy had to crane his neck to see the top. The building was sleek and modern, a far cry from the humble places Roy was used to. It stood in stark contrast to the small-town auto shop he had left behind. The doorman, impeccably dressed, opened the door for Roy and he stepped out, his breath catching slightly as he looked up at the glass and steel structure before him. This was it. This was where his life was going to change. Inside, the lobby was just as impressive. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were lined with art that looked expensive but effortlessly chic. Roy couldn't help but feel a little out of place. But as the elevator doors closed and the car ascended smoothly, something in him started to shift. This was happening. He was in it now. When the doors opened, Erin was waiting for him. She stood with a warm smile, her presence radiating calm confidence. She wore a dress that looked simple but elegant, and she greeted him like an old friend. "Roy, I'm so glad you made it," she said, her voice full of warmth and familiarity. "Come on in." I've been looking forward to talking to you. Roy stepped into the office, which was just as sleek and modern as the lobby. A large desk sat in the center with an expansive view of the city outside. The walls were decorated with contemporary art, and there was a sense of clean lines and space, all designed to convey power without being overwhelming. Aaron gestured for him to sit on one of the plush chairs in front of the desk. I know this all probably feels a bit overwhelming, Aaron said as she sat across from him. But I want you to know that you're exactly where you need to be. I've been thinking a lot about you, Roy, about what you can offer this company, this team. It's not just about what you can do for us, it's about what we can do for you. Roy shifted in his seat, unsure of what she meant. I don't understand. What is it that you're offering me, Aaron? Aaron smiled, her eyes calm but intense. What I'm offering you, Roy, is a chance to work on something that matters. A chance to take all your skills, your ability to fix things, to understand how people work, and put them to use on a much bigger scale. You're not just going to be fixing cars anymore. You'll be fixing something more important. You'll be helping people in ways you never imagined. Roy's mind raced. He had been doing his job for so long, it was hard to imagine doing something else. He didn't know anything other than working with his hands. But Aaron was making it sound like this was a chance he couldn't pass up. But what could I possibly do here? Roy asked, his voice uncertain. I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about. Exactly, Aaron interjected, her smile widening. You're exactly what we need. You understand how things work, and most importantly, you know how to make them work again. That's rare, Roy. It's a skill that goes beyond just cars. You can apply that to anything. Roy's heart raced, the weight of her words settling in. Could he really do something bigger than what he had always known? Could he step outside of his comfort zone and into something so completely different? I don't know, Roy said, his voice shaky. This is all new to me. I know, Aaron replied, her voice warm and encouraging. But think about it. You've spent your life fixing what's broken, helping people. Why not take that to the next level? Why not use your skills to help people on a much bigger scale? The world is bigger than the auto shop, Roy. And I'm giving you a chance to see it. Roy sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The world outside the window, the tall buildings and the busy streets, felt both intimidating and exciting. He had always been content with his life, working with his hands, doing something he knew and understood. But Aaron was offering him something more. She was offering him the chance to step into a new world, to use his skills in ways he had never imagined. I think I'm ready, Roy said, his voice quieter now but filled with resolve. I want to try. Aaron's smile widened and she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with pride. I knew you would be. Welcome to something bigger, Roy. Welcome to your future. As Roy stood up and shook her hand, he realized that the life he had known, the one filled with grease, tools and predictable days, was behind him. He was stepping into something new, something unknown. But for the first time he felt ready. The helicopter had been the first sign. This was the second. And he knew deep down that his life would never be the same again. In this compelling narrative, Roy, an ordinary mechanic, offers a kind gesture to a woman named Erin who is stranded in the rain. What starts as a simple, selfless act of kindness quickly transforms into something extraordinary when, the next day, a helicopter lands in his yard. Erin, who turns out to have connections in high places, invites Roy into a world far beyond his own, a world filled with opportunities he never thought possible. This story explores themes of unexpected connections, the power of kindness, and the life-changing impact of stepping out of one's comfort zone.